Hi, um, welcome to our webinar for this week. This week, what we will be discussing is configuration management, including kind of user management in Luma Charlie, and kind of a bit more specifically it um, how it works with MSSPs. Uh, Lima Charlie is one of those platforms that's very powerful for MSSP. So we want to touch a little bit on why that is, and then show you some of the unique aspects of managing Lima Charlie for MSSPs. I'll begin by saying also that this is not going to be strictly interesting for MSSPs. Configuration management on Lima Charlie is always very useful, and I would say that if you're serious about setting up your organization on Lima Charlie, this will be very valuable as well as an introduction on how to put your best foot forward. So before starting that conversation, we will switch over here, look a little bit what we're going to be talking about. And so I wanted to begin the discussion really by kind of a why Lima Charlie and MSSPs. Because I think it's worth pointing out kind of a couple of the pretty critical points that make LC really powerful. So the first one is the full control over the technology. Again, we talk about Lima Charlie as security infrastructure as a service. And what that means is that you get the full control, you get the keys to your deployment in Lima Charlie. And so what that means is that, especially as an MSSP or as a company, you may have a customer of yours that's fairly simple, but they're not all the same. They're not managed exactly the same way. Some of them have differences. And you need to be able to adapt to all those environments and still make all of those environments integrate deeply within how you manage your SOC. Because Lima Charlie is not this, sometimes we talk about the widget that has 3 different ways of interacting with it. Lima Charlie is this infrastructure. You can control everything, all of the different aspects. It's a pretty big differentiator for MSSPs. The other one, that is pretty obvious is kind of the build per usage, scale up, scale down, build monthly, which is a pretty big deal. We often talk to people that tell us, we wanted to go to talk to, these other vendors, and unless we have 5,000 endpoints, they won't even take our call. And so, with Lima Charlie, this is drastically different. Just like, we talk often about kind of being, a little bit like AWS of cybersecurity. This means that you're able to onboard any kind of size of organization. It's built monthly, so you can scale down exactly at what you need at any point that you need it. And you're built on usage, so that means you don't have to plan way ahead in time. So the what? Okay, hopefully, sorry about that. There's a glitch. Hopefully things are still okay. So the other big difference is the multi-tenant aspect. So when we talk about Lima Charlie, multi-tenant first, so that means everything is kind of built on this foundation where we expect, that you will be doing things in a multi-tenant way. It's not something where, oh yeah, we give you a subdomain and per like web interface, and it's just kind of slapped onto a really legacy product, set up on like a physical server or something crazy. We truly are white labeled. No, sorry, not white labeled, but multi-tenant right from the get go. So we're designed to work that way. And then the last aspect is, white label, OEM, full or partial customer access. Again, we mentioned this pretty often, but like AWS, we provide security infrastructure. That means that you run your business and what you need to run however you'd like on top of what we do. Because you want to be an MSSP and start deploying on some customers, you don't have to talk to a salesperson over the next 3 weeks talking about your plans for the next 2 years and sign a 3-year contract to like any of that stuff. You can just come on, start using Luma Charlie. Use it the way you want it, how you want to deploy it, wherever you want it. This is infrastructure that's just available for you to build any of your capabilities. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the components that go into what we're going to be talking in the webinar, which is configuration management and like user management, like as an MSSP, how you want to get set up. There's two main aspects. So user access control and configuration maintenance. So user access control, we'll start with that because it's pretty self-contained topic. Hopefully it should be pretty quick. So there's basic concepts in Luma Charlie that are important to understand. So you have users. So a user is literally an email, right? Anybody that goes on app.lumacharlie.io can create a user. It's free. It's not specifically tied to an organization or a company or an MSSP or any of those things. It's just a user. It's authentication. Then we have organizations. So an organization is another big unit. That's really the tenant level that we talk about. So when you configure multi-tenant, so if you're an MSSP and you have a customer, they're likely going to be an organization within Luma Charlie. And that's what allows you to configure it at that level, but also, get usage at that level, get billing at that level. If you want to create one, like delete one, somebody, decides to go somewhere else, like it's very easy, but like that's the tenant unit. And an organization does not like automatically belong to a user or to a company, but it's kind of the unit itself. And then as the creator of this organization, you will then begin to have access. You're the first person to have access to it, and then you can choose how you want to grant other users or API keys or all that stuff, which we'll talk about, how you want to grant access to that organization. So the users and organizations are kind of two different, objects in the Luma Charlie ecosystem. Permissions, pretty straightforward. We have a ton of different permissions for different types of activities. That will be like, I don't know, sensor.list to list the sensors, all the way to, like detections.get, or I'm paraphrasing, they have a specific name. But it's fairly straightforward. Permission is just kind of this, the ability to talk to specific APIs, essentially, in Luma Charlie with regards to a specific org. API keys. So API keys, again, are pretty normal concept. We have two types of API keys in Luma Charlie. So by default, an API key is going to be scoped at a single organization. So you can go into your brand new organization, create API keys, and they will be only applicable to that one organization. So you're going to create the key, you're going to give it permissions, and that's going to be only available to that org. It operates on a single org. The other type of key is user-based API keys. So that is the ability to say, as a user on the Luma Charlie platform, I create an API key that will represent all of my access. So this API key will have access to all of the organization and the sets of permissions that I have access to as a user. So, it can be a lot more powerful. It's also, a lot more sensitive. But this is kind of a good way to create an API key that you can use in a pretty broad sense as an MSSP across all of your organizations, for example. And we'll get into, how all those concepts map into, here's a good way to proceed forward. The last concept is an org group. So to help a little bit visualize that, I will switch here to to a diagram. It's a little bit of a crude diagram. So you can see here in the top left, we have a representation of an org. So as I mentioned, it's kind of its own object. An org can have users associated to it. So I can say, let's say I create an organization. I can say, you know what, John has the user John, at corp.com has access to this organization and with the following permissions. So in a very kind of one-to-one fashion, so I can assign it directly to an organization. And that's kind of an easy way to just, get started. If you're just playing, experimenting with Luma Charlie, that's the best way. So, however, as you can imagine, oh, no, no screen share. Really? Oh, my bad. Manual mode. So here we go. All right. Sorry about that. So, like I was saying, the top left here is the organization. You can see I have a bunch of users, each with their kind of sets of permissions. Then, at the bottom here, you can see we have some users, right? They're each their own object. Well, as you can imagine, if you're trying to manage this at scale, that won't work so well, right? If you're trying to, you have a new analyst coming in, if you're an MSSP, you have a new analyst coming in and you want to give them access to, the 50 orgs, your 50 customers, going one by one is kind of a pain, and it's not the greatest way of managing permissions and access. So the concept that comes to the rescue is this org group concept. So the org group takes sets of a couple of the different objects and kind of it encompasses it in one way to manage it. So an org group will have a set of users. So and I'll show you what that looks like, but you have an org group, you say, here's the users that are part of this group. An org group also has members, so member organizations to this group. So those are orgs that are part of this group. Finally, an org group has permissions. So that's a set of permissions that are part of this group. And all of this put together essentially tells Luma Charlie that all the users in this group have all the permissions in this group to all of the member organizations in this group. So you can kind of see it in a way like a role. Usually it's reused as a role within your MSSP. So you may have an org group that is for analysts. So you say, my analysts internally need the following permissions to do their job, and they need to do them on all of my, my general kind of organized customers, that I maintain. And here's a list of all of my analysts, so that when I have a new analyst coming in, I can just add them to that group, and then they automatically get all the relevant permissions to everything else. All those groups and the permissions that are at the org level are additive. So that means a group won't remove permissions from another one. That means you can create exceptions quite easily. Let's say that you're an MSSP and one of your customers want direct access to their organization. You don't have to create a group just for them. They may not be part of any of your groups. Really, that makes kind of sense. But you can go directly into that one organization and add them there. So they get access to that one organization. But for the rest, maybe it's your admins, your auditors, the people with read-only access or operators. Then you can create groups and you can manage it at that top level. That makes it a lot easier to manage. So that's kind of all of the components of user access control. A common concept that you will see, if you're setting up, let's say, your MSSPs, right? Like, here's the way that we could recommend that you set this up. Here I'm showing you, it's a public repo that we have. So refraction point slash MSSP dash demo. And essentially, we've set this up kind of just like an MSSP. And we in the README, we talk about a bunch of these concepts and what they look like, and you can see an actual config, and I'll get into more of the details here. But we document kind of the permission aspect here. So this talks a lot about what I've mentioned, but here's the setup. One setup that can work well for an MSSP. It is to begin by creating a root user account. So that means, if you're at corp.com, creating a user at corp.com, here I think we give it as an example. I'll make this bigger. It's Luma Charlie -root at corp.com. So this is a user account that we will be using as kind of the ultimate authority into everything that you're going to be doing on Luma Charlie, and you'll be delegating permissions from there. So for example, you create this root account. It has its own credentials. So, it's not a user account that, all of your operators share access to. It's really something that you protect, right? That you maintain as the core. And when you have a new customer, what you can do is you can use that root account either by logging into Luma Charlie and creating that organization, or by using user API keys to kind of do this setup. But the idea is that this root account has owner access to all of your organization. So owner access means everything. And then from there, you can create, as I mentioned, a user API key. So that means it's a key that will represent all of the access of that root account. And you can use that to start doing configuration management, which we'll get into. Afterwards, then you can start and create organization groups that will represent the various types of roles that you have, within your MSSP. One thing I did not mention around org groups is that there's one more, type of element that is part of a group, and that's the owners of an org group. The owner of the org group is a set of users, and these are the users that have access to modify this group. A member of the group does not automatically get access to modify the group. And the flip side is true as well. So if you're an owner of the group, does not mean you get the permissions as a member of that group. So they're really kind of treated differently. So you can have, for example, this root account be the owner of your org groups. That way, that the only way to change that is through, the credentials that come through that root account. So as an example of this, let me see if I don't have that. Let me just, I will show you an example of what that actually looks like. So what we're going to do is we're going to log into Luma Charlie. There we go. So this is a fake root account that we've created. And we'll just use, there we go, fake credentials. All right. So here's an example. This is the actual kind of MSSP setup that is directly related to that repo. And when we start looking at configuration management, you will see why there's a true link here, an operational link. So you can see at the top here the groups. So we've created a couple of different groups. In our case, we've created the admin group. Apologies, it's pretty zoomed in, just to make sure that it's visible. But the idea is that we have a single owner, we have three organizations part of this group, and here is all of the permissions. So for the admins, they have all the permissions. But then, we'll have viewers. So the viewers will have limited sets of permissions. So for example, they will not have the ability to create artifact ingestion keys or control those keys, things like that. So we've created a set of those groups. And then what we would do when we have somebody coming in, we would just go in like this group, and we would go down and add a member to that group. So just add anything. All right. So that's kind of an overview of access management. As you can see, there's a lot of pieces that you can, kind of play with. So you can use root accounts, but you don't have to. You could use, your own personal account as kind of the root account, and then only create, two groups for specific purposes. You could create user API keys for, some of the CI/CD pipelines, or you could, use org keys for everything, right? Which, theoretically would be kind of secure because you're enforcing that security, but obviously it's a little bit more to manage because now you have like API keys for every org. Let's get into what is a bit more interesting, I think. So it's the configuration management. So Luma Charlie relies heavily on this concept of infrastructure as code. So we want to structure things so that you can treat them as configuration files, and you can manage them as configuration files. And then you can ensure that what's in your infrastructure in Luma Charlie is what your config files say they are. Having this strong link, it's not anything we've invented. It's from DevOps. Having this strong link allows you to manage a lot more efficiently, what's at all of my customers. What is the configuration? What are the detection rules? What are the, the data forwarding rules that are present at every single customer? And to have that in a centralized way, in a way that you can track changes. So who added this rule exactly? So to be able to track those changes, to be able to manage them in a centralized way also means, this new type of attack came in, I have the rule for it. It should be on every customer. And so having the ability to apply this to every customer without repeating yourself over and over by like copy pasting that rule to 100 spots, right? You want to manage this in a kind of cohesive way. So all of these things are CI/CD or DevOps concepts, right? So CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous deployment. So it's this idea that you can manage those config files, and changing the config file itself is what ends up pushing to production a change to your customer, to the configuration on your customer. And with that comes reliability. It's a big sign of maturity in organizations and how they manage all of these things. And this is what's going to enable you to scale in the long run without having to manage, chaos. So let's show you a little bit what that means. So you can see here, we have three customers, three dummy customers, right? Obviously that we created. So three orgs, and we have a root account. So I'm logged into the root account right now. And what we've done is we've created, if I go to my user profile as this root account and API keys, we have a single API key that we call CI/CD orchestration. And that is what we're going to be using to do the pipeline, which we'll show you. So I'll go back to the repo. And again, have a look at the repo. Like, it's all public, it's all there. And more interestingly is that it all it's all living thing, right? This is not like a dead sample. This is what's actually being mirrored to that organization. So if we look at this, we have a couple of different, we have two different spots that are of interest within the repo. We have the configs themselves, and then we have the automation pipeline. The automation pipeline will do two things, pretty simple. So this example uses GitHub Actions or GitHub Workflows. I think they have different names that allow you to, automate on things that happen in GitHub, automate actions. So in this case, we have two actions. They are in the .github workflows. And those two actions are the deploy and then the dry run. So we've kept it pretty simple for now. We will be expanding in the future. The idea is that one of those flows is set up on PRs, pull requests. So that is, for example, let's say as an MSSP, one of my analysts says, hey, I've created this new rule. This is great. We should push that to customer. They can create a PR, and that PR will come in, and then you can manage who's able to review and approve this. If we look at the dry run, is what's being triggered by pull requests. I won't get into like the full details. Vast majority of this is actually boilerplate code taken from like the GitHub template. But what you can see is that we've set up two secrets. So one for our user ID, our org user ID. I'll blow this up a bit more. And one for the user API key. And what we say is that this kind of executes whenever there's a PR in the concept of that pull request. What we say is, we use the Luma Charlie CLI. So we pip install Luma Charlie, and then we simply say Luma Charlie configs push. You might see in older documentation or see people talking about Luma Charlie sync. That is the old version of the configs. So for backwards compatibility, we've created a new version that's a lot safer and nicer. So here we're saying Luma Charlie configs push to like the first org ID. Force, meaning we want to say, what's in the org should be exactly what's in the config. We don't just want to add what's in the config. We want to mirror it. So if something's in prod and it's not in the config, it should get deleted from prod. We say dry run. So specifying the dry run will tell the Luma Charlie CLI not to actually apply any of the changes, but rather narrate what would be changed by APR. And then the config, and I'll switch back to those configs, what they look like again. So we'll point to the config, and then we just give a bunch of flags, which is all the types of resources that we want to be applied in this case. So this is everything. So we do this for every customer. That means if you get a new customer, you could just add it to that config file, the OID, like that line, and then you would be kind of part of that CI/CD pipeline. So the deploy is exactly the same, except we don't have the dry run flag. So let's look at what the configs actually look like and what's the logic behind it. And then I will end by showing you a recent PR that we put through, what it looked like, how things moved through. So if we go back to the root, the idea of configs in Luma Charlie is that they are a very simple YAML files. So the way we recommend that you structure this is that you keep at least two sets of config, and you'll see how that works. But the idea is you have a global set of configs, and then you have per customer configs. The global, as the name implies, it will get applied everywhere. So that is the stuff that every one of your customer has. Maybe, for example, you want to, for every customer, take all of the detections generated by Luma Charlie and send them to a Splunk instance that you have. Every one of them. It's all the same. So you would go and you would put that in your global configs. And then the per customer configs are exactly what it sounds like, which is that they are going to be applied to specific customers. So let's look a little bit at a little bit deeper. So here we go in global. Config files are kind of generic in a way. A config file can contain any resource information, like config information about Luma Charlie. It's all about what you decide to put in each config file. And additionally to that, a config file can have include statements. So you can say in a config file, I want to include this other config file. So let's look. Here's all.yaml. You can see that this is all it's doing is that it's including other config files. That allows us to, when we're going to apply our configs to your Luma Charlie environment, that allows us to, in the CLI, give a single config file, and it will know, okay, I'm going to go include all these other config files, merge this together, all those resources together, and then this is what I'm going to push and mirror onto my customers. Let's look at a specific one that has some kind of data. Okay, so here's an example of fp.yaml. In this case, you can see that we're adding a definition of type FPs, which is false positives. So those are rules that describe what detections should not be emitted. So that means if a detection gets generated somehow by a sensor or an artifact or anything like that, it goes through those rules. And if a rule, an FP rule matches, that detection will just go away, will not be sent everywhere else. So it's a good way to say, maybe you're managing 50 customers, 20 of them use Kaspersky, whatever. And Kaspersky, starts doing this weird behavior in this new patch that triggers a detection that you have. You could go and try to modify your rules everywhere or push things everywhere, or here you have a global set of false positive rules. You can say, you know what, if this happens, forget about it. In this case, it's actually a false positive rule that applies to a detection from a Windows event log artifact, but it could be anything. So we define FPs, we give the name to this FP rule, and then here we define the data that goes within it. So that's look at our webinar, our documentation on detection and response rules. It'll describe what that means. But we have rules that are quite different. So we have resources that you can have as part of a config file. So here, resources defines what Luma Charlie resources should be enabled on that organization. So here we're saying, you know what, the API insight, which is our 1 year data retention, should be enabled. And VirusTotal, the API, should be enabled on that organization. Also register to all of those services. So then you can start and say, these are the services and APIs that my org needs. These three are global, but this customer, they have this one thing where they want to do this, leverage this other external system, and they need a couple, access to the OTX service, things like that. So you can do that. So that's an example of our global rules here. The all just says, include everything in here. That's fairly straightforward. Now, let's look at what a per customer, could look like. So I'm going to go into customer. We have a directory for each customer. I go the first one, and we define a main.yaml. And if we go into that, you can see that we're doing two things. We are including all the global rules. So that means if I include this main.yaml, all the global stuff gets pulled down with it. And we also include custom rules.yaml that is local to this customer's directory. Let's have a look at that. Actually, that example, it doesn't have one. So I'll just switch to customer 2, which I just added something for an example. So customer 2, you'll see, is very similar, except we're also adding a custom FIM, so file integrity management as well. But if I go in custom rules, you can see this is the same type of config file that I had globally. It just describes a resource. In this case, it describes a DNR rule, so a detection and response rule. And you can see that this is a test detection. That's the name. I want to look for command lines that contain the value LC tracer. And when that happens, I want to generate the detection. It's super straightforward. This is a kind of rule that you might use if you're doing testing. You want to make sure that like everything is set up properly. That way you can open a shell, do echo LC tracer, and then you'll get a detection. So this is here, and when I decide through the CLI, right, Luma Charlie configs push, and I point to this main.yaml, all the global definition configs get pulled in, and all my local configs get pulled in, and the result is what gets applied to that organization. So that's what when we were looking at the workflow earlier, and if I go kind of very briefly into the deploy, this is what we're doing here, right? On these lines, we're saying, hey, push the configs, and you can see this is where we were. Configs customers, customer 1, main.yaml. So we're saying on that organization ID, push this root config, and it knows how to bring in everything else along with it, like the global, all that stuff. So this is a fairly simple but advanced kind of example, right? We have global, and then we have per customer. But obviously, if you start thinking about it, you could have a lot more complex, right? You could have different categories of customers or different types of capabilities. Maybe you have tiers of customers that you do different things, so you can manage it as YAML files. Here's the beauty of this is now that I have this in a repo and I have these workflow configured. Actually, can I look at a pull request? That's a good question. I don't know now if I'll be able to go and see it, or action maybe. Yeah. All right. So let's look at dry runs that I've run. And let's look at a pull request, adding a new test rule that I ran earlier. So if we go into it, and we start expanding, here what we're doing is we're saying, okay, show me what happened during this pull request, the automation that we did. Now I see all the steps. Oh, I'm disconnected. Just making sure. Okay. Now I see all of the steps that have been taken. So if I expand one, I can see the log here. So we start by saying, hey, this is a dry run. Like nothing here actually happened. And we have a very kind of simple way of narrating what happened. So equal means, you're talking about the API Insight resource. That's good. I checked. It was already in prod. I didn't have to do anything. That was good. So you can see everything's equal here. So nothing had to be done. But we were adding a rule to customer 2, the tracer rule I showed you as an example. But now if I look here at customer 2, very similar, except it got to that rule and said, hey, you have a rule called test detection, and the plus is indicating it was not in prod. I would have to add it to prod to be a mirror. If something was in prod but not in your config file, and you said -- force, so I want to mirror both, then you would see a line that would say, maybe minus rule, some old rule, maybe that you deprecated. So you removed it in your config. You don't have to go and remove it anywhere manually in prod. You just run this, and your pull request would tell you, like, here's all the things I would do in prod. And then when you're satisfied with this, then what you can do is you can just go and so I'll go back. We can look at the deploy. So when if that, oh, I think it's making me drop a little bit. All right, so if that pull request gets approved, then that gets pushed to my master branch, and that is what would do the actual mirroring in prod. So let's have a look. Right here, we're saying, hey, we merged pull request number 2, which is what we were just looking at. Okay, let's expand it. So we're looking here. We can see, plus rule test detection. There's no indication that this was a dry run. So this actually went to prod. So if I switch back to our view from earlier of Luma Charlie, and I go into that customer, let's load up their dashboard. I go into DNR rules. I can see that my detection was created. And I can see that if I look at the details here, the buy, it's telling me actually this was created by the CI/CD orchestration API key of my root user. So this is giving me an indication of how this came in. So you can kind of start, I'm sure the wheels are spinning. There's a ton of different levels of integration that you could do. And more importantly is that as you get set up for this kind of things, you are really, if you start that way, you're going to get a much, much easier job in the future as you expand. It's going to take way less time to manage customers and new customers. Let's say we have a new, I'm not stepping through it, but let's say if you have a new customer coming in, it's super trivial for you to just say, you know what, okay, new customer, here's the org ID, put it in a config file, and say, right now, maybe there's no exceptions, they're just starting, so just apply all the global rules. Commit, it gets all configured for you, it's automated. You know exactly who's adding what at what time. This is the way that you want to move forward. Some of the, we touched a little bit towards the bottom here. Some of the things that you could add to even get better. So some of the people in Luma Charlie do really amazing things. One of those things that you can do is you could add more complex checks on your pull requests, right? Maybe now you're saying when an analyst wants to add a rule, it will happen. You'll get bit a few times where you push a rule and it just generates a ton of false positives, and because you ran straight in prod. Well, Luma Charlie has a replay service that allows you to take a rule and say, hey, take the last week of data from my org and replay it to that rule and tell me what I would have detected. So don't generate detections, just let me know what it would look like. So some folks will actually have a PR step in their pipeline that will say, oh, you want to change this rule? That's fine. I'm going to take that rule and I'll run it in replay. And I will look at the results that come from that. And if that rule generates more than 5 detections in 1 week, depending on your threshold, I'm going to block. I'm going to say like, hey, this is generating a lot of hits. Are you sure that this rule is what you expected it to be? But on the other hand, if it generates 1 detection, then you're going to say, yeah, no problem. It's approved. Like move it straight to. It can go straight to prod automatically. So you could do things like that. There's a lot, a lot of really cool ideas, a lot of things that you could do. But the bottom line is, especially if you're an MSSP or you're trying to, bring the maturity level of your SOC or your security organization to kind of the next level, right? And I think as an industry, we're kind of reaching that point, right? We're saying, this is not just like, cowboy stuff. Like we're professional organizations and we manage, what we look for and how we look for it and change and do this in a very scientific approach. This is really cool. This is where you want to be. So, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. There's a bunch of different ways you can do that, right? We have answers at lumacharlie.io. We also have, contact us in our community Slack. So slack.lumacharlie.io. You can get the invite to join a community. We're very present there. And obviously, we also do like webinars pretty often. So feel free to have a look at leavecharlie.io/webinar, and you can see, not only what's coming up, but we did in the past as well. We tried to kind of hit topics that are very useful for people that are coming in, to get you, up and running faster.